Hello and welcome to another interview episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths, with me, Jon Cripwell. Today's topic is one that will affect every listener who works with children. It's all about how we can build a sense of belonging in a maths lesson, how we can help to engage meaningfully, and I'm talking about cognitive engagement here, children in their maths learning, and help them to feel successful and help them to feel like a mathematician. It's a great interview, research-backed and with some practical takeaways as well. So make sure you give it a listen right to the end because there's some gold there towards the end of the conversation. As ever, I would encourage you to like and subscribe on whichever platform you listen to this podcast, just so that you don't miss an episode. But without further ado, we'll get into it. My guest today is Tom Oakley, and I am delighted to have him on the show. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us. I should say, as we're recording on an evening, so Tom is giving up his evening to join us, and I really appreciate that. So, Tom, as you are aware, if you've listened to the show before, I'm always curious to hear what your sort of context for maths is. Was it a subject that you enjoyed at school? Can you remember much about maths lessons?
Yeah, so I think maths for me, and I've heard the podcast a few times, like a lot of people, I enjoyed it until I found it too hard, basically.
Yeah.
It was one of those subjects where I had to work at it. It wasn't an easy subject for me, but I enjoyed I was one of those kids who enjoyed collecting and gathering facts. It didn't have to be maths. I enjoyed knowing facts and being able to kind of regurgitate facts. So I enjoyed that. And I did okay at maths, did all right at school, got decent GCSE in it, found A-level hard, and then decided after doing A-levels I wanted to be a teacher and did a 4-year teaching degree at Warwick and with a primary maths specialism. And that's when I realised that maths gets really hard, like really, really hard, because as part of the 4-year teaching degree, there's a year's worth of degree level maths content in there. And I was struggling to keep up with that. So I enjoyed learning about how we teach maths and the kind of the pedagogy of teaching maths. But some of the kind of computational dynamics and group theory and those kind of things were kind of really stretched my grey matter. But I appreciated that experience because it put me back in the shoes of someone who was a learner, of having to cognitively work hard. And remember coming out of those lectures and seminars thinking I was exhausted. And I'd literally just been taking the information in and trying to keep up. So,
It's funny you mentioned that because we were talking just before we started recording about families and things. And I was saying I've got a nearly 13-year-old daughter now who is in year 8. And she still likes to involve me in her homework. And I am just about on the cusp already in year 8 of kind of my knowledge and understanding of maths. And one or two bits I really have to look up. So, yeah, I can empathise. It's not degree level, Tom, but I can empathise with that, that feeling of not being sure about quite how I'm doing things. And believe me, there was plenty of times when I was teaching maths in year 6 as well that I had to think about things too, particularly when you're trying to explain something in a different way. But it's really important, isn't it, not to lose sight of what that feels like when you don't know something and you are sort of trying to grasp it. It can be intimidating at times. It's good to be reminded of that a little bit. So you alluded to the fact that you didn't allude to it. You told us you went to university for 4 years. You did a teaching qualification, teaching degree, and then straight into teaching.
Yeah, that's it. So my first lesson as a trainee teacher, I was 18 when I did that. And my first lesson as a class teacher, I had a class of my own when I was 22. I taught in the West Midlands in Shirley for three years and then moved to southwest London, worked in Earlsfield, which is in Borough of Wandsworth, for 6 years after that. And it was in those two schools, really, where I realised that I didn't just enjoy teaching maths. I helped other people to teach. I enjoyed helping other people to teach maths as well. So in my first setting, I shadowed the maths lead. I knew that was something I wanted to do. Her name was Anne. She's a great teacher. I learned a lot from her about teaching year 6 and teaching maths, and that kind of set me up. I moved to Wandsworth, and within a year of being there, the well-established maths lead went on maternity leave, and I took the role over. And it was through going to like network meetings, subject leader meetings, those kind of things, working with the brilliant Nikki Ashton, who is still leading maths teaching in Wandsworth and Southwest London, that I realised that my kind of curiosity, my interest in the pedagogy of maths and curriculum design and task design was something that really got me going. I really got fired up about learning that kind of stuff. And I was fortunate to go sometimes with Nikki to some of the national strategies meetings in London, and got to know Debbie Morgan. And it was a really exciting time in maths because there was big investment in maths subject leadership, and I became a lead teacher for maths in Wandsworth. So yeah, 6 years teaching in London, 4.5, 5 of them as being a lead teacher for maths and doing all those kind of things. But I got to that stage, like lots of people do. I was teaching year 6 for a long time, working ridiculous hours, that I almost burnt out. Teaching was taking over my full waking day. And I got to the point where I realized I'm not sure if I still love teaching. I love working with teachers. I'm not sure if I still love teaching. And a good friend of mine suggested, why don't you consider teaching overseas? So I did. I went and taught overseas in Thailand for 2 years and of regained my love of being in the classroom. And things were a bit differently out there. The school was almost a starter school, so lots of things were getting. So I was doing a lot of curriculum design, leading a lot of professional development and supporting NQTs and all that kind of stuff. And when I decided that I wanted to return to the UK, I started looking for out-of-class based jobs. And I stumbled across an application to be a full-time local authority maths advisor in Cambridgeshire. And I absolutely landed on my feet in that job. You couldn't have wished to work with a better group of people, led by Emma Fuller and Gary Casey. They're not only knowledgeable, but brilliant people. And they really understood what it took to help schools improve. And for 6 years, I worked as a school improvement advisor in Cambridgeshire. And it was one of the best things I ever did, John, because like you'll know in your job, you are invited into people's schools. And you get to see everything, right? I supported schools that were outstanding, but predominantly supported schools that were struggling. Some of those schools I would do one-off visits, but my preferred was working for a long period of time with schools over 15, 16, 20 weeks, visiting once a week, developing teachers, leading staff training. And I absolutely loved that job. I loved working closely with the Maths Hub and leading subject leader training and all of that kind of stuff out of Cambridge. And what a great place to work. You know, I got to meet the team at Enrich. You know, we'd regularly meet up with them and talk about what was going on and sharing and contributing to research and that kind of stuff. But as lockdown hit, I was starting to have doubts about kind of, do I still want to be doing this job or can I make more of a difference? And because everything went remote, I wasn't getting into schools as much. So I found myself kind of pining to be in the classroom, pining to be back in school. And I came across a school that needed a lot of help in Bury St Edmunds. And I worked with them gradually over the course of 3 years, doing occasional advisor visits. And then they were looking for a deputy head teacher. And I was asked to apply. I was fortunate enough to get it. And I've been there 3.5 years now. So I'm now an out-of-class deputy head teacher. I say out-of-class, I'm in everybody's class pretty much at some stage in the week, covering lessons and the best bit is I still teach maths every day. I teach maths every morning. So I'll get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, what a career journey so far. And it's I think it's great to see that sort of breadth of experience in terms of, you know, being teaching abroad as well. I've spoken to a few people that have had fantastic experiences teaching abroad. Many who haven't actually come back. So you know, it's interesting that you found yourself pulled back to the UK. I guess family ties and things are important, aren't they? But to have supported that many schools in that capacity as an advisor, and then to get back into into teaching as well, it's wonderful to hear, because we hear a lot of teachers leaving the classroom, and I totally understand, as somebody who has done that in the last year, I understand why, because much like yourself, that kind of burnout, and teaching in year 6 for many years as well. I know it's stressful across the school, not just year 6, but it can feel like a treadmill, can't it? So
like you can feel like, and I'm sure many listeners of the podcast will feel like it as well, the more school responsibility you take on, there's a tendency you might feel more guilt that you can't give as much headspace for your classroom. And I love listening to your conversation with Joe Austin, and he was talking about the importance of feeling prepared for the lesson.
Yeah.
And the reality is there's only so many hours in the day. And if your attention is being split in 5 or 6 different directions, the only way you can feel truly prepared for the lesson is if you are teaching lessons you know really well. So I can see why, whether we're teaching deputy heads or people like that, they stay in the same year group for a long time and teach the same things, because it's the only way you can have the headspace for the curriculum content. Because if you were to go from classroom to classroom year after year and you're learning new curriculum as well as new children every year, your attention is split in so many different directions. You can feel like you're not doing any one job as well as you want to. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can completely empathise with that. In the last few years of teaching, I was assistant head in year 6, 3 days a week, working across other schools 2 days a week, and it's very difficult to maintain everything to the standard that you want to, which is where I sort of found myself, I think, towards the end. And I would like to think that maybe at some point I will get back into the classroom or into some sort of teaching role, because I do love it. But at the moment, I'm really enjoying what I'm doing here as well. So yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? You can't do everything. That's kind of where I've landed, I think.
Yeah, and I
Wanting to
think
do
the
everything, but you
best
can't
piece of
do everything.
advice I got, the best piece of advice I got given is be where your feet are, right? Like wherever you are in that moment, be as present as you can be, because you
Yeah,
don't
I
know
love
how
that.
long you're going to be in that space. I ended up being an advisor longer than I thought it would be, and I absolutely loved it. But because I made a conscious effort to be present, to be there as much as I could be, I took so much away from it.
Yeah, yeah. So what we sort of connected on LinkedIn, Tom, and I've mentioned this recently, that I think there's some great conversations going on in the sort of education space on LinkedIn at the moment. I think it used to be Edu Twitter that you would find those sorts of conversations happening, and now I feel like they've moved, quite a lot of them have moved over to LinkedIn. And we were sort of talking about belonging, that sense of belonging in a classroom, and how we can build a culture in our classrooms where children feel that they can be successful mathematicians and feel like maths is for them. And I've had a few conversations about that sort of area with different people. We've talked about maths anxiety and how that can often be um, a, a, a contributory factor to that can be the culture in a classroom, and that feeling that you have to get things right all the time. And that's why maths anxiety can affect people who find maths difficult, but also people who are actually very successful in maths lessons. And it's not just for one particular group. I also spoke to Emma Lockhart about girls and maths and that sort of feeling of having to get things right, and the pressure that comes with that as well. So it's an ongoing conversation, and I'm really interested in what we can sort of, how we can develop that further in this conversation tonight. I guess what I'm interested in, where we should start, Tom, is what was it that drew you to that particular question? What was it that gave you an interest in this area?
Good question. I think as an advisor, in between the many schools I visited, there was a lot of driving in the car, a lot of listening to podcasts on the road and those kind of things. And
Yeah,
I was fascinated by the work of Daniel T. Willingham, Why Don't Children Like School, and those kind of things. And there's tons in there about one of the reasons why children find school hard is for a lot of children, they find it really hard to feel like they belong in the classroom, and how important belonging is. And when we talk about belonging, it's becoming a bit of a catch-all phrase, and people are using belonging and culture a lot recently, but I think it's important that we're talking about children being seen in the classroom, them feeling valued in the classroom. They feel valuable to the class, that they feel like they can contribute. And when I was working as an advisor, listening to this research, reading this research, I was also leading a project across the county to diminish the difference, we called it, which is all about reducing the attainment gap between children in receive pupil premium funding, so vulnerable children, disadvantaged children, and their peers. So did lots of reading around that. And one of the things that came up time and time again is that if children have poor self-perception in maths, so the idea that their maths self-esteem, for want of a better phrase, their self-perception in maths, for those children that feel like they aren't good at maths or maths isn't for them, the challenge to be successful in maths is not only harder because they might be less willing to try, because they might be less willing to fail, but it will take them more effort to believe that they are successful because they are starting from a negative self-perception that I'm already behind everybody else. So if you think about some of those children that might be in year 5, 6, 7, or 8, if they've been in the same class as their peers since reception, let's say that there's a girl or boy in their class, let's call them Joe, who is often successful in maths. They put their hand up to answer most questions. They might have heard Joe give 1,000 correct answers in maths lessons over their time together, but they might only remember themselves doing the same thing 5 or 6 times. It doesn't mean they've only answered the question correctly 5 or 6 times, but they don't store that information as much as they've built this perception that Joe over there, maths is for them. But for me, I'm not that person. So they've already got this distinction between what maths is and who can be successful at maths. And that happens for lots of reasons, because effort isn't easy to see. Success isn't easy to see. You only really see it if somebody else is getting a well done from the teacher over there or those kind of things, because you never see their book. But that means also that other people's failure or lack of success isn't easy to see. So you might perceive that all those children around you are doing better than you because the only time you see wrong answers is in your own work.
Yeah.
So children develop this idea over time, not as a major one-off event. It's not like a big bang and all of a sudden I'm no longer a maths person, but they build up this self-perception over time through thousands of incremental incidents or events where they compare themselves either to their own perception of what being good at maths is like, or the success they perceive other children are having. And we saw this a lot. So as part of the project, we worked with 12 schools, 20 teachers, over 100 children, and we worked with them from year 3 all the way through to year 6, working with whoever was teaching with them that year, delivering training, getting in, doing model lessons, talking to pupils, doing hours and hours of pupil voice. And for the children who made accelerated progress in their maths over that time, who kind of effectively caught up their peers, you could see it in their pupil voice responses about the questions that related to how they felt about maths and how they felt about themselves as mathematicians. And I must admit, since leaving the role of advisor in 2022, I hadn't given it a great deal of thought because I've been in the weeds of being in, sleeves rolled up in the classroom, in school, and all that kind of stuff. But this year, I've been a member of part of a project through the Reach Foundation led by John Hutchinson and Mohammed Abdallah. And that project's called Culture That Connects. And they've been kind of giving us nuggets of research and getting guest speakers and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of reignited all these memories of all that work we'd done. I was like, yeah, it's in there somewhere. I've done a lot of this reading and now actually I'm thinking about it again. So long answer to a short question, but...
No, but and it's really helpful. That context is really helpful, Tom. And I think any teacher, whichever year group you are working in, possibly with the exception of reception, I'll come back to that in a moment, we'll see those children who look less comfortable in particular, it's not always maths, but in a particular subject. It could be reading, it could be maths, whatever. Obviously, we're focusing on maths here. And I can empathise with that as well. I was a relatively capable pupil at primary school. I don't remember disliking maths in Key Stage 1 particularly, but I do remember sort of shutting off from it in Key Stage 2 and not feeling that feeling of not being able to contribute, I think is something that's just resonated with me as you were talking about that there. And not being able to contribute in the same way that I would in other subjects where I felt much more confident, much more able to put my hand up and give, what might be a successful answer. So for me, I suppose it's, why does that happen? That's but maybe more than that, what can we do about it when we see this happening? Because as somebody who, as I say, spent a lot of time teaching in year 6, I know it's very difficult to change that self-belief in the few months that you have with a child in year 6 before they move to secondary school. And that was always key for me, that I wanted them to go to secondary school feeling like they were a mathematician.
I think one of those things, John, that you say there rings, I think, universally true. If you ask teachers of maths, regardless of whether they teach reception through to adults, they can probably think of at least one, if not several children, students in their classroom who might class themselves as not a mathematician, or that maths isn't for them, or that their physical demeanour changes in the maths lesson. And you could probably think of a student right now, right? That a child that you've taught, or several children that you've taught, that they appeared different. Their composure is different. They might seem either more on edge or more hypervigilant, or those kind of things. Or they might become more keen to do kind of classroom admin jobs in the maths lesson, like desperately keen to hand out the books or the whiteboards or whatever it is. And we can all probably think of several of those children. And the thing is, right, is that where a school has a really effective culture, everyone feels like they belong, everyone feels like they contribute. Even in those highly effective schools, there are some children that feel like there are some lessons that they can contribute less. So you might see some of those lower attaining pupils, or the pupils with negative self-perception, being desperate to do the handing out jobs because they still want to contribute.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's,
yeah.
the PISA survey, right? Everyone talks about the PISA survey, international survey that studies students, not only their attainment, but their disposition towards learning over time. John Hutchinson and Maradella brought it to our attention that over the last 15 years, the PISA studies have shown that children in the UK have felt a sense of belonging less and less. Their sense of belonging has degraded over time in the last 15 years. So societally, we've changed as well. And that's more prevalent, or at least the degradation is more prevalent in pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds. So pupils who are already vulnerable to less academic success feel less connected to the classroom environment, and the idea of themselves as learners. And that tells us two things as well. Not only is it their in-classroom experience that affects their sense of belonging, but there's a societal thing going on where people are finding it harder to connect to the idea of, we are a group, we are doing this together, I belong to the group and I can contribute to the group. And we can all probably speculate that things like COVID will have had an impact on that, but so will tough financial times as well, because people become inward looking, or they start to look for the things that they don't have. So yeah, I think there are tons of factors that affect people's self-perception, not only whether they fit in, but whether they can ultimately contribute and whether their contribution is valid or valued.
And it's so important to get right, because it stays with people potentially for the rest of their lives, doesn't it? There's a huge amount of research that shows that those perceptions that you have of yourself as a mathematician, even just at the age of 7 or 8, this was why I'll finish that thought. Even at the age of 7 and 8 can colour your perception of yourself as a mathematician for the rest of your life. And I'm sure that we either feel like that as adults yourselves. If you're listening to this, you might feel that maths isn't for you, or is a weaker subject, or something that you find harder to engage with as an adult, or you might work with people who do. And I've done a lot of work with staff over the years who just felt like maths was slightly scary, particularly, when we talked about working in year 6, supporting children, or working in year 6 as a teacher. There was a bit of a perception that I don't feel comfortable going to year 6 because the maths is trickier. And, we're talking about maths that's for 10 and 11-year-olds, Tom. It's not, we're not talking GCSE maths at this point.
Yeah, and there's two things there, right? Because as an educator, you might have the fear that you don't know the maths as well as you should, but also there's a fear that you don't know the pedagogy as well as you should. So if you are faced with a high attaining child in that situation, you might not know how to stretch and challenge that child. If you're faced with a child who is struggling to get to grips with it, you might not have the subject knowledge to know the longer journey of where that child needs to get to. So you might not know how or whether to avoid certain tricks, I hate that phrase, but maths tricks that might lead to pitfalls later on. So there's a fear of imparting the wrong information or intervening in the wrong way. And yeah, absolutely. I've worked with colleagues who, like me, will cover several classes, and someone says, "Oh, are you happy covering year 6 maths lesson on or whatever?" And they're like, I love teaching that group, but I don't have the subject knowledge to do it, and I don't want to get it wrong. And it's a genuine fear that they have. And yeah, I think, lots of people have said it several times in our country, that is not a taboo at all to say, I'm not a maths person. Whereas
No.
it is a taboo to say, I can't read. Whereas it's a taboo to say, I'm illiterate. There is no taboo at all in that society to say, I can't do maths, or I'm not a maths person, or we're not a maths family. And you will hear it in parents at parents' evening. Oh, it's okay. We're like that. We don't get numbers either. And yeah, I think that's a societal thing.
Yeah, and it's going to take a little while. It's going to take a little while, isn't it, to change that perception of ourselves. And why I mentioned reception earlier in particular was because there's again a fair amount of research. I can put some of it in the show notes that suggests that children in reception generally don't have negative connotations of themselves as mathematicians. This is something that they learn as they move into Key Stage 1 and into Key Stage 2. But by the age of sort of 7 or 8, that perception is kind of, I don't want to say ingrained, but definitely solidifying.
It's becoming part of their identity, isn't it? And I think there's a lot there about like developmental milestones. And it's well said that children age 7, 8, 9 are developing a sense of who they are as an individual that children age 4, 5, and 6 aren't. They are starting to form their own self-identity of, I'm this type of person, I'm good at these things, and these things make me happy. And generally speaking, the things that make us happy are the things that we feel success at. And lots of people have talked about before the link between success and motivation. It doesn't really matter which one comes first, success or motivation. The fact is that there is an interplay between the two. The more motivated you feel, the more likely you are to have success. But equally, the more success you have early on, the more likely you are to be motivated later. The two go together.
So so that's interesting. Just thinking about that link between motivation and success, then, is it worth us delving into that a little bit more? Are we suggesting that we should be? Is it about pitch then, and making sure that children feel successful early on, or are successful early on, or is it about making them feel successful early on? Is there a difference between those two things?
Yeah, there's absolutely a difference between the two. And for those listeners who are familiar with Rosenstein's principles, it's not a surprise that one of those principles is about ensuring high success rate for pupils. Because whilst it would be nice to think that we could teach children to memorize the steps within an algorithm, all I need you to remember to do is to put this digit here and then do this thing here and then do this thing here and then this thing here. But in these situations, you don't do that. You wait until you have this combination. Children don't remember procedural steps by memory. They learn it as a habit. And a habit only forms with repeated practice and repeated engagement. And I'm sure we'll want to talk about the word engagement and what that means. But the mental capacity and willingness to keep going and trying and strive for that success, that's how the habit is formed. And we know that maths depends more on habit formation than it does on memory recall of steps, because when you speak to high functioning mathematicians, even at age 7 or 8, when you ask them, how did you know what double 130 was? They might say, I know the answer is 260, but I can't tell you how I did it. They're doing it off habitual routine or intuition. And they could have done it 5 different ways simultaneously, because that's how quick the brain can work. If you're in that headspace, if you are mentally engaged in the task there and then. And there's I really recommend the writing of Michael Pershing for anybody who's interested. Michael Pershing does tons on task design, all of that kind of stuff. And he's got a newsletter, Pershmail, which can be random about all sorts of things. But one of the most recent ones that's come into my inbox is all about this. There's been a debate in education since the days of the ancient Greeks about whether memory is important or not, right? Spoiler, it is, right? And we've got to train children to develop their memory, but we also want them to train the habits, and the two are linked together. And unfortunately, building the habits requires persistence and perseverance. And the only way we're going to get children to be persistent and perseverant is if they are successful and if they are motivated. So they must feel successful, because the feeling affects their willingness to keep trying.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, I've been working with some teachers today who've been thinking about problem solving, and we've particularly been thinking about mathematical habits that can help us to be effective problem solvers. And as always, when I'm working with a new group of teachers, something that it's not revolutionary, but something that I borrowed from one of my colleagues, Tom Isherwood, is one of the things that I like to do is just put it out there. What qualities and traits do we want a good mathematician to have? And as ever, they didn't let me down. The teachers said all the right things like, I want them to be curious. I want them to be resilient. I want them to be able to solve problems. I want them to be able to think mathematically and to have some fluency. There was very little about actually being able to calculate and solve equations. But the mathematical habits that we talk about, as you say, one of those being a willingness to have another go when you failed. That suggests that there needs to be an experience of failing as well as being successful. So is that a parallel? How does that sit together? How do those two things sit together? Can we be successful and fail at the same time?
Absolutely. So again, another recommendation, right? I'm obsessed with how learning happens in the brain, right? Because it's something we can't see, but we can guess how it's happening based on best bets and research and those kind of things. So I really recommend the writing of Efrat first. And she talks about how schemas built over time. And Sarah Cottinghat's done a brilliant book about Aujabel's theory of learning and how schemas are built in the mind and those kind of things. And effectively what they're saying is it really helps if we can encourage children to go through the process of self-explanation. And there's tons of reading that we've done there from Professor Bethany Riddle-Johnson, all about the importance of self-explanation, right? And what does that look like in the classroom? It looks like getting children to explain what they see and what they notice, but also what do they predict will happen if we change something crucial. So why do people find, my favorite thing to teach, John, in maths is telling time. Right?
Oh no, Tom! That's my worst thing to teach. I've got PTSD from trying to teach time.
Absolutely right. But how do you teach time successfully? You teach it through pattern spotting and predicting. Right? What's going to happen if we are at 1:52 and we add a minute? It's going to be 1:53. Great, success. You predicted it. You got it. Great, we're on 1:53. We're going to add another minute. What's it going to be? You predicted it. You got it. Great. We're going to get to 1:59. At this point, we don't need to have explained that there are 60 minutes in an hour, because there's going to be a magic that happens when half of your class goes. It's going to be 1:60, and you're going to show them, whether it be on the old ITP clock, or whatever interactive you're using, and then they notice it isn't. All of a sudden, they've got a reason to find out why it isn't.
Yeah.
Because I've been successful. I want to be successful again. Now, if I started with the time is 1:59, what's going to come next? And my class are keenly going, they're my 6-year-olds going, it's going to be 1:60 next because we've just done one more. And I know that one more than 59 is 60. And all of a sudden you drop the bombshell on that it's not, you've lost half the room. And one of the most important things to think about is how do we sequence questions, whether it be through variation, through prediction or self-explanation or those kind of things, so that children experience safe success so that they are ready to experience something they don't know. If you start that lesson with something they don't know straight away, you know what's going to happen. And there's a reason why we don't do it, right? When you learn to drive, your driving instructor on lesson 2 doesn't say, we're turning right now into that traffic. You are not ready to experience that. We are going to practice turning left hundreds of times because it's easier, it's safer. We know you're going to be successful, and you're going to learn the mechanics of turning the car. We're going to build up to that moment, and we need to bear that in mind when we're thinking about setting these children up for these things. Now, there are going to be some children that know that already. How do we prevent those children from going, I knew it, you guys all got it wrong, and then rubbing? That's classroom culture, and that's beyond math.
And I love that idea, Tom, of, as you just said there, the teaching time, the idea of helping them to notice what happens when it changes from 1:59 to 2 o'clock. And what we're talking about there, that noticing, is engaging them with the maths, isn't it? It is a level of engagement that wouldn't necessarily happen if we just told them what happened when, it goes 1:59 and that goes 2:00 and it goes 1 minute past 2. So is it worth us just talking about engagement a little bit? Because I was talking to you before, and I mentioned it on the Aftermaths episode a few weeks ago. On LinkedIn, I posted something about engagement and pace, and I had a few comments, mostly from secondary teachers, actually, which were perfectly valid, which essentially said, why are you talking about engagement? Engagement, we know, is a poor proxy for learning. And I thought, but that's not what I meant in this situation in terms of engagement. I was talking about not engagement in the lesson because all the children are sat quietly and seem to be doing something. I was thinking about engagement in the lesson in terms of engaging with the concepts, engaging with the thinking, and being cognitively engaged. I was really pleased to see a comment from Kristin Zorn, who is a sessional academic and educator in Australia, actually, and she said, we need to remember that there are 3 types of engagement that we talk about in pedagogies. We're looking at behavioural engagement, which is students looking engaged, and that sort of idea that you walk into a classroom and children are on task, in inverted commas. Emotional engagement, so how students feel about what they're doing. And cognitive, so actually what they are thinking, which is harder to measure, I agree, but still the thing that I am striving for in a maths lesson. I want pupils cognitively engaged with the task. Engagement is an interesting word, I think, in pedagogy and teaching generally at the moment. I'm trying to lead a revolution of the word, Tom. Before we started recording, we ended up having a conversation about why that word engagement might have slightly negative connotations. I think it's probably worth just reiterating that, if you don't mind, for the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for many people who taught for the last 15, 20 years or so, if you taught between 2006 and 2016, there's a really good chance that you went through a period of having formal lesson observations. And part of the criteria was that the children needed to be seen to be engagement in the lesson. So there was pace. If your lesson wasn't fast enough and your children went on the edge of their seat, there was no way your lesson was going to be considered good. And we've learnt since that racing through the content with hyper-stimulated children is no guarantee for success, right? So for lots of people, experienced teachers and senior leaders or school leaders now, the word engagement is tainted by their first-hand experience of being judged how many children are physically excited about the learning, or actively listening to every single word, or showing their listening, and that was their proxy for this must be going in. And as we know, you can look engaged as you like, but actually if you're not cognitively there, if you aren't attending to the learning and trying to sense make, that's what first writing is all about, making sense and making connection of this new thing to what you know, then that wasn't a good lesson. But we know that sense making might mean that child has to look off into space so that the only thing they're thinking about is how this links to what they already know, right?
Yeah.
If somebody asks you a difficult question, you might look away because you're trying to avoid any stimulus that's going to stop you trying to make that connection, whether it be a name you're trying to remember or a concept or those kind of things. People can show their engagement in lots of different ways because actually the engagement itself is invisible. It's in their head.
Yeah, I told an anecdote a few weeks ago on the podcast about being at a conference and being given some puzzles to have a go at, some Alex Bellos Guardian puzzles. And I found it quite frustrating, one of them, because I couldn't find a way into it and I was having a go at it. I was getting a bit frustrated. And
yeah, you threw down your pencil, didn't you, John? You went
I
off
did.
And got a drink.
I threw down my pencil in frustration and I got up and I had to walk around the room. And that helped me actually to, when I came back to it, just to sort of re-regulate myself, I suppose, in a way. And through a conversation with somebody else, actually spot a way into the problem. And then I could feel successful with it. And yet we don't expect children to behave in that sort of way in classrooms, do we? And I'm not suggesting that we should have 30 children just getting up and wandering around the classroom. That's not productive either. But that, you know, there are moments where you need some quiet reflection, or you need, just to stop thinking about something for a minute in order to process it. And we need to be aware of that, I think, as teachers, and recognise it and value it, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Like off air, John, I shared a recommendation. And lots of people will know the name Carol Dweck, and
Yeah.
she's written at length about growth mindset and fixed mindset. And people stand in different courts in whether they believe that growth mindset and fixed mindset is a thing. And that doesn't really matter. Basically, the idea is we want children to be in a position where they feel like they can improve. Well, she's co-authored or co-edited a book called The Handbook of Competence and Motivation, with Elliott and Yeager, 2017. And chapter 32 is specifically about children in school. And they share some practical suggestions for what school leaders, educators can do to make sure that children have a positive sense of self, that are willing to cognitively engage and put themselves out there, and see themselves as being potentially successful before they're successful. And I think this is one of those things that doesn't get talked about enough, specifically in maths education, because we're all happy to say, yes, it's a challenge to get through the content and it can feel like you're on a curriculum conveyor belt sometimes.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily talk long enough about the importance of slowing down to make sure the children feel cognitively successful and willing to keep going. We might get all the way through this 4, 5, 6 week unit on fractions to the point where children go, I think I've got it now. And then they turn up on Monday morning and now we're talking about measurement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need to be cognizant of that. And they give some recommendations about considerations for instructional design, the pedagogy that we use, task design, even assessment practices, and even the communication between home and school, and why these things are important to learn. And basically, it all comes back to the idea that we want to create a climate in which children feel like they can make a meaningful contribution, that they matter to the lesson and that the lesson matters to them. And this is the big idea that goes alongside belonging, is mattering, right? And Mo Abdallah mentioned on the course that we're on a piece of work by Polentensky, who writes about mattering. And there's a lovely quote, I've written it down, I have to read it to you, John. It's almost impossible for something to matter to someone if they feel like they don't matter. And we can probably all think of some children that feel like, in this lesson, I don't matter. What I've got to say isn't going to be heard. And we don't want that. We want the opposite of that in a maths classroom. We want all children to feel like they matter in the room and that maths matters to them.
It's really sad to think that some children might feel like that, but yeah, I can totally understand that they do. And as I say, it's not that they necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily a reflection on their current teacher or on any teacher necessarily, but and it's not necessarily in every lesson, is it? But recognizing that some children in any given lesson might be feeling like that, I think, is the starting point to trying to do something about rectifying it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we've got time, I've got a few practical suggestions
I
for
would
teachers,
love that. Yeah, please.
for subject leaders, for school leaders to think about pedagogy routines, etc., that can help children feel like they matter to the lesson and that the maths matters to them. And I think the first one, we've mentioned it a lot of time, is give children a chance to make a meaningful contribution to the group, whether that be a partner talk, a small group, or the whole class. I've got two favorite ways of doing this, right? Partner A and partner B discussion routines. Partner A solves one question, partner B solves a variation on the same question, but not the same question. They independently solve the question of each other and then have to explain it to one another. And then partner B is going to need to give feedback on what they've heard from partner A. Both people inherently matter in that task. This task is only successful if everybody's involved. Partner A and partner B discussion routines beat turn and talk to your partner any day of the week. Because this whole conversation, this what do you notice, what's the same, what's different, isn't possible if we both don't do our job. And we both have an option or an opportunity to give feedback to one another. So that's my number one, like, partner routine for small group mattering.
Yeah. What thought have you given to how you partner pupils up in order to do that? Just thinking about does it matter? My personal opinion is that it probably does, but I'm curious as to what your thinking is about how you make those partnerships work.
Most teachers would probably think there's a couple of children in their room, they definitely wouldn't sit next to one another for whatever
Yeah,
reasons, right? There might be those.
yeah,
But I'm of the opinion that if children frequently change places, let's say every 2 weeks or so, they sit in a different place for maths next to different people, they will matter to more people over time.
I like that. Okay.
And my other routine that I've talked about for years and years at maths comps and research heads and those kind of things is a simple change to the show me your whiteboard, right? So mini whiteboards, ubiquitous, every classroom, once upon a time called show me boards, all those kind of things. Most teachers have a routine for lids on pens, show me a board, 3, 2, 1, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And my number one advice that I probably gave more than any other as an advisor and go on talks is that if you want those children to feel like their contribution matters, don't ask everybody to show their boards at the same time. Because they
Right.
know you can't see and you can't take in everybody's response all at once, right? You also can't effectively use that as a formative assessment tool. Because if you see a sea of 32 boards or whatever, and 3 of them are wrong, you might miss them. And because everybody's arms are in the air at the same time, you might not see which children it is. So I would always say, slow that routine down by 30 seconds, right? And people might have talked about this before, so I apologize if I'm repeating this for anybody who's heard it. But it was always better to say, this table or this group, same as them, you're going to show us your boards first. Yeah. And you're going to give that gesture, that nod, that acknowledgement or verbal praise to somebody of something you've seen. Great. Boards down and move your way around the room. And you might have 4 groups, 5 groups, depending on how your tables are set up. But that slows it down only by a minute. But the amount of information that you can process, hold, and act on increases, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5,
I like
tenfold.
that, Tom. I guess it depends what the task is that you've set them to do, but I always used to find just walking around the room anyway a better way of doing that than trying to get everybody to. Because I wasn't great at trying to spot the incorrect answer amongst 30 odd whiteboards being waved in the air. And some children have written it in the corner, tiny because they're anxious about showing their answer in front of everybody else as well. That can be intimidating too, can't it? So take a couple of minutes to stretch your legs and have a wander around the room and see see if you can see the thinking happening. I think is great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And we said, didn't we, that this self-perception builds over time as an outcome of thousands of mini interactions and experiences and those kind of things. Equally, class culture and belonging builds up through small interactions, not just singing happy birthday to the person on their birthday, but the gestures, the nods, the pat on the back, the coming in, listening into their conversation, giving them a bit of verbal feedback, annotating their whiteboard in a different color to show that you are having that one-to-one interaction, all of those kind of things. They build a sense of cohesion within the room. You matter to me, I matter to you, and we are going to get better together. And so, if you aren't in between the tables, if you aren't listening into the partner talk, you're missing out. So, I mean, both of those things are much more achievable if you have a classroom where behavior is good, right? But I would also say that you're much more likely to have a classroom where behavior is good if everyone feels like they matter and everybody is experiencing success.
Yeah. So again, coming back to that, the teacher's role in that session. Another favorite saying that I've heard recently is that a teacher is sometimes doing their best work when they appear to be doing nothing at all. And actually, just taking the time, you are not a performer. You don't have to be at the front performing all the time. Taking the time to listen in on conversations, to walk around the room, to, try and see that engaged thinking happening, and making note of it is really time well spent. And I would challenge anybody who walks into a classroom and sees a teacher, apparently, unless they're sitting with their feet up on the desk, flicking through a magazine, if they are wandering around the room and don't appear to be doing anything, I think that's really time well spent, to be honest. I think it would be great to see more of that happening, to be honest. So just those small sorts of changes then, Tom, in terms of how we receive feedback from pupils, and it goes back to a little bit to oracy, I suppose, as well, doesn't it? In terms of
I was just
engaging
about to
them
make
in...
the connection to your excellent episode on oracy, because it begins the moment the lesson begins, right?
Yes.
Yes, we need to be aware that transitions cause uncertainty. How children come into a lesson, how they go from one activity to another, can put children on edge. They can become hypervigilant, etc. And that some children might feel great coming into a classroom where there's a do now activity and the room is silent. They come and sit down, but there will be other children who are entirely intimidated by that experience. So why not improve that routine by allowing your pupils to talk together about how they would solve those questions rather than doing them in silence?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's another way, as from the teacher's point of view, of getting a view into what's actually happening in terms of thinking and that cognitive engagement that we're talking about. I can't think of many other ways of trying to observe that. We can see what children are writing down, we can see what they're recording on whiteboards and things, but when it comes to really understanding how they're thinking and what their thought processes are, talking, I think, is possibly one of the only ways that you could really do that and do that effectively. And I guess when it comes to that feeling of belonging, engaging somebody in conversation about something and listening to them, funnily enough, that was one of the other mathematical habits that we talked about today, was active listening and valuing other people's opinions, making sure that people have got the chance to give their opinion and have it listened to, must have a positive impact as well on that feeling of belonging, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the difficult bit, right? Of putting all of these things into practice to build good talk routines, slower whiteboard routines, building success and having these micro interactions and all of these kind of things can slow the lesson down, and it can prevent you from doing necessary practice. And as an advisor, I was always cautious about talking about how much, because I would always get asked the question by school leaders, how much practice should I see in a book? Should I see pages of calculations? And I said, I can't answer that question without seeing the interactions that happened whilst those calculations were being done. Now, if those children did them in silence and only did their sense making in their head, some children will have been left behind by that. But if that was a classroom full of talk, where we're noticing, actually, if you notice that question B, C, and D all follow this pattern and this, then actually having 3, 13, 23 calculations could be really worthwhile. It builds the habit. It gives the children to experience success and failure in a safe place, and they start to build connections to what they've done before. So no, I was never that advised to go 10 questions. 10 questions? What do you mean 10 questions every lesson? That's way too much, because with the books alone aren't enough to say. I would just say there needs to be a balance. There needs to be a lot of practice, but let's make that practice visible. Let's make it heard so that we can give those children that feedback. And you said a brilliant phrase, gathering that feedback from the children. Too often we talk about feedback's all about what the teacher does for the child. And there's a great place for that kind of wise feedback. I'm giving you this feedback because I've got high expectations of you and I believe you can do it. But we can't value the feedback from the children enough. It's how we make those decisions about whether we stay on this track or whether we need to make a deviation for this group to get back to where we want to be later. Again, I think Joe talked about that on his podcast, about that kind of, we can't see the lesson as railroad tracks that we have to stay on. We have to be prepared enough for the lesson to know where I might need to take necessary diversions to help those children understand and not make a misconception or an overgeneralization.
And I think that's such a good point, Tom. And I guess finally, the last thing I would probably say on this, really from a teacher's point of view, is just when you are looking for that feedback, or let's say that you've asked a closed question and you want to see who's understood it, that moment where somebody gives you an incorrect answer can be a pivotal moment. Knowing the children is so important, isn't it? Knowing the pupils, knowing that Sam is absolutely fine. You know, he's very confident in his maths, and he's given me a wrong answer, and I can say, actually, no, that's not right. You know, and we can move on, and he'll think about that and probably come back to it. As opposed to Charlie, who actually, I need to handle this in a slightly different way. I need to see what the thinking is and see if there's an opportunity to not reward them for giving a wrong answer, but to say, I can see how you've got to that point. I can, you know, I can see there's some really good thinking going on there, but have you noticed this?
Yeah,
And
one of my
it's,
favourite phrases, sorry to interrupt, John, one of my favourite
no, it's
phrases
okay.
is, "That's a really helpful mistake you've just made. Can I share that mistake with the class? Because
Yeah.
I'm certain that somebody else either made the mistake or nearly made that mistake. What a useful mistake to have made." And, you know, you were saying, I've noticed that this child's made a mistake and they don't normally. The teacher has to be willing to ask another question just like it, and the chance that that child's going to get that one wrong as well, to confirm or deny that was a one-off.
Yeah.
So I've just done a quick fire, 7 had 4, and he's said 12. So I'm going to follow it up with another one, 17 had 4, he said 22. Right. If I just asked one, I might have assumed he normally gets these, right? He's probably fine with that fact. I've asked 2 in a row that involve 7 and 4, and he's got both of them wrong.
I once had a pupil in my class in year 6 who was absolutely fine with her number bonds up to a certain number, and then after that it all went to pot. And it took us a little while, more than just 2 questions actually, Tom, to unpick the fact that she wasn't counting the number 13. She she decided that, you know, almost subconsciously, that the number 13 was not going to feature any longer in you know, when she was counting things. And so that took a little bit of unpicking. And as you say, I could have asked one question and just assumed that it was, you know, just an error. But actually, yeah, we had to ask a couple more to ascertain quite what was going on. So yeah, you just reminded me of that. I hadn't thought about that for a few years.
There you go.
Tom, I really appreciate the time that you spent with us today, this evening. We've covered a huge amount of ground, some theory, and then a lot of practical advice, I think, that teachers can take away and hopefully implement into their lessons. If people want to keep up with you, are they okay to find you on LinkedIn? Is that the best place?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you, John, I was a edgy Twitter native, and politics made me move away from it. And I can be found on Blue Sky, but more frequently, I'll be on LinkedIn.
And if it's okay with you, I'll put a link in the show notes to LinkedIn, and people can find us both on there if they so wish. Tom, thank you so much for your time tonight. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we chat. It's been absolutely fantastic having you share your expertise and your insights into these things. Really appreciate it. I know the listeners will too. Thank you so much.
Cheers, John. I really enjoyed it.
Great stuff. For the listeners, we will be back on Friday with Becky for another Aftermaths episode. But in the meantime, I would love to hear your thoughts on everything that Tom has shared tonight and the things that we've talked about. If you would like to get in touch, it's primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk, or as I say, you can find us on LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms for that matter. All that to say, we will be back on Friday, and I hope you have a fantastic week. Take care. Thanks.